I'm Nahid Ismail, board member from the Heart Productions and moderator of this event. We thank you for joining us. Today we have Robert Seigel, who is a 30-year film industry attorney. He will share information with us on marketing, sales, and current status of streamers in our film industry. We have a list of questions that we will ask Robert, and we are also open for your questions. You can put your questions in the chat bar, and I will ask as many as possible for you. I want to introduce to you Carol Dean. She is the president From the Heart Production and the creator of the Roy Dean Film Grants. Good morning, Carol.
Oh, thank you, Nahid. Well, we've been working with Robert Seigel for many years. He works with From the Heart, he works with me, works with Carol Joyce, and he is a donor to our Roy Dean Film Grants. He's a good lawyer for filmmakers, and he shared legal information with us on our podcast, and he joins Tom Malloy and I on the intentional filmmaking class. Robert works with filmmakers from the beginning of their films all the way through the sale of the film. And because of this, he's negotiated with major studios like HBO and with many of the streamers like Netflix. So that's why we asked him to join us and share what he can to help you maneuver in this ever-changing field of distribution. So Nahid, would you please introduce Robert?
Absolutely. Robert Seigel has more than 20 years experience in the counseling and representation of producers, writers, directors, distribution companies, and foreign sales agents concerning development, production, marketing, distribution, and exploitation of fiction and non-fiction film, television, publishing, and new media projects. His clients' projects have appeared theatrically on network, syndicated, public, and cable television, and have earned Academy Award and Emmy nominations and awards and prizes at major film festivals. Mr. Seigel has lectured on issues concerning the motion picture industry at many prestigious schools and organizations. You can find him on Internet Movie Database with credit on films. I have also included his contact information in the chat box. Good morning, Robert, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good to be here. Yeah. So I guess we'll get started in a moment.
Right. We really thank you, Robert, for joining us. And I know that you often negotiate with major cable stations and streamers for your clients. So the first question I want to start with is for you to share with us some of the ways for filmmakers to approach a cable or a streamer with their project.
Okay. We're first going to talk about, streamers and the cable and, network. But again, we should also talk about the more conventional means, such as making a deal with a sales agent or a distributor or a licensee for separated rights like educational or DVD, which in the documentary film is still there, not so much as in the narrative, believe it or not. Hard to believe, but true. So, but let's talk about, everybody wants, how are we gonna make a deal with Netflix? And, for me, it makes me feel a little bit like Mr. Rock and This Is Fantasy Island for a lot of people, because it's a tough way, because a lot of gatekeepers, not just the Netflix, but also the other major streamers such as Hulu and Amazon and Apple, and as well. So I think, in terms of how to best approach a cable or a streamer with their with your project, is really to find and form an alliance with somebody who has worked with a streamer or a cable service as a producer or an executive producer or a director. If that director has a track record, but also is directing, is a proposed director for your particular project, because again, it'll get you past, one of the hurdles that the gatekeepers put out there. Now, how do you find one? I wish I could tell you. It's just that it's a lot of, it's like how you get an agent or a manager, like friends of friends and things like that. And if you basically know of an agent, if you have an agent, obviously, or a manager, that helps get in through the door. But again, it helps. But again, if you can find somebody, to kind of godfather or godmother your project, basically, then that kind of helps along the way. And that's really, especially if this is a project that just is just starting out, that's kind of embryonic, it's really a script, because what you're really shopping around for is you're really shopping a property, a script, basically maybe underlying rights, intellectual property, and adapting it into a screenplay, which is a whole separate issue. Again, a lot of times you may think, oh, well, let me help package it and find the director and find like the principal cast. And it's kind of a double-edged sword with the streamers and the various networks of television service, because what you see as a marketable element to your package, they may not necessarily. And if you've already made a commitment to, the director or to the actor or actress, it becomes quite problematical. Like I have a client who's he's done several, horror films, and we're dealing with a horror, streaming service. And basically his track record is the number one marketable element. And in terms of the cast, he's bringing cast in, and we already, we put it in the agreement, who the cast, was going to be or is. But again, this is subject to their approval, the streaming service. I mean, they pre-approved my client as a director. It's basically the cast that becomes, has to be someone that they find it. Again, horror is not as cast dependent because the genre is the star, unlike other genres, basically, like suspense and mystery, where it's the cast, and the cast could be, people who have followers, or people that obviously, who have who have box office or have nominations for Emmys or wins for Emmys or Oscars or things like that. So, basically, it's the toughest part to approach, these services, with, just in the very early stages of the project.
The toughest is to approach them with the early stages. Well, when is a good stage then?
Well, ironically, the fact that you're approaching them early is good, because you don't have a lot of what might be perceived as encumbrances on the projects. Like, you've made deals with directors and cast, so you have that degree of flexibility. See, the client, basically, he had the script and he had interest from some people. But again, it wasn't, contractual, commitments. So that's kind of the best way. They're kind of like lightly attached, and they could be unfortunately detached if it doesn't work out. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword.
Okay, well, I've even heard, Robert, that some people, they're using AI to run it through an AI to decide who's the best people for your actors, because the AI has all of the data of who's good foreign and which countries they're known in, and that a lot of major or studios are using AI to make decisions for the choosing the cast. Have you heard that?
Well, the irony is that we've always had like these lists, basically, of people that have kind of like in and have high, Q potential, which was like the TV version of this. I mean, there are a lot of different, there used to be something called the OLMA index that was in the Hollywood Reporter, with a list of like 100 top ranked top names that were ranked. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that people have tried to game the system in terms of bringing in cast. in, just whatever tool works. But again, it's only a tool. And, at the end of the day, it's a guide, basically. You shouldn't really be so wedded to it, basically, because a lot of times these names will shift a year later, believe it or not, or 2 years later in the process. And the irony is that like in terms of selections, we use algorithms. They use algorithms, these streaming services. That's how they always know the projects that you like to watch, because they've seen what you've done before. And you see that on Amazon, you see it, all over the place. So, it's a tool to be used. And again, a lot of it is how well, what's, their prior track record as a performer or a director or so forth.
All right, but don't be too attached. Be flexible is the bottom line here.
Right, because at the end of the day, the streamer is going to be, or the network, service, I'll say in general, they're going to pick the people that, if you pick someone that they don't think is going to move the needle on it, and it's not, cast agnostic like horror in most cases, they're just going to say that's not going to work. And it's like you're going to have to find somebody that kind of works, that works for them and hopefully works for you as well.
Okay, well, talking about ways to approach the cable or the streamers, is it best to hire an attorney? Sometimes, I would like all your ideas to try to find someone to shepherd your project and go to directors who have worked with Netflix before, or producers, so that you got that much ahead for you, working for you. But if you don't have any of those great ideas you suggested, would you then use a sales agent or attorney who has experience with Netflix to get you in?
Well, I think basically a sales agent, yes. An attorney, again, the streaming services, they care more about the fact that the attorney may have worked with, the service, in negotiating a deal, not necessarily because they're, because of helping to package a project or something like that. So, a manager, because a manager often produces, an agent who technically can't produce, they have the relationships, they can help in terms of packaging as well. But, but a sales agent, yeah, I would say a sales agent more than an attorney, unless, the attorney, kind of holds him or herself out as an executive producer. And there's some who do that. I don't. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a producer, an executive producer. I'm just very upfront about it, basically. I don't want to be my own client, I always tell people.
Okay. Well, Nahid, are there any questions in the chat bar?
Yes, and we have very good questions. One is from Tessa Clark, and Marlon Warren has the same questions too. They're asking, I don't want to edit my documentary to a final cut. So should I just edit rough scenes and send those with a synopsis to a distributor?
I guess the best way of looking at it is the more you can get this to a final final version, the better. Because a lot of people say, oh, I can imagine it, I can extrapolate on it. Most of them can't. So basically, if you don't have a final version, you can try to do some kind of like, it's not necessarily a sizzle reel, but some kind of trailer or teaser. If that's all you got, and you fill it in, basically you can do that. But again, the more and more you've done this, and the closer and closer it looks to a final project, the easier it is for them to kind of interpret or extrapolate on it. And also the stronger and stronger your hand is in terms of negotiating. A lot of people say, okay, well, I'll take it to a network or other service, and they'll put in the finishing funds, and that'll be it. Problem is, the deal that you're going to make is probably just going to be enough to finish the film, basically. Okay. And then, of course, they get to ask you a question like, what's your budget? you know, again, if you're handing in a completed film and they ask you what's the budget, you know, often I'll say, since you didn't finance it, what right do you really have to really know that? The value of this project is not tied to how much money we spent on it necessarily. But if you're asking for like funding to complete the project, that argument goes out the window.
Okay. What if the distributor broadcaster doesn't like the final cut? Don't the distributors want to have a say in the final cut?
Well, that's a question you have to figure out for yourself in terms of, you know, whether or not you want to go with this particular distributor or service enough in order to basically, you know, allow them to have final network approval over the version that's in there. Again, if you've completed the project, it's kind of a done deal. It's not a lot you can change around, but basically, to some extent, you know. But again, if this is something that is kind of like is more latched than locked, so to speak, then basically there is that flexibility. I mean, we try not to have changes unless it's for like censorship purposes, you know, or if there's like commercials, like not necessarily for streamers or things like that, obviously, but like if it winds up on like, you know, syndication, network television, basic cable, so forth, we try to keep the editing to a minimum. But obviously, if you're walking in with a project that isn't finished, that weakens your hands somewhat.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Robert, and thank you, Tessa, for asking the question. So we'll go to one more question by Mercy, and then Carol, you can take over with your question. So Mercy is asking, if you have a docu-series that has been filmed in one particular city, generic subject, is it still applicable to distribute throughout the US, or should I focus more on a community type of channel in that city?
Well, it's more of a marketing question, a legal question, but you know, docu-series, they're tricky in the sense that, and I've had clients come and they've shot a whole season, you know, of like, whether it's on web series or something like that, and I've had services that basically say, we like the project, we don't like the episodes that you shot, so basically we want you to reshoot them all. You know, so they had to junk the whole first season and start with season 2, as it were, you know, basically. So, you know, if you're going to do a docu-series, you try to do, you know, the sizzle reel, the promo reels, you know, with a Bible and a pitch deck and, you know, things like that in order to move it, because, you know, the worst thing is to like shoot a whole series and they're not interested. Even shooting a pilot episode can be somewhat risky. So if you know, I mean, it's better like if you do some kind of promo reel that conveys the essence of it, you know, and then of course if they're interested, you can, you know, obviously you're going through the development process where you make a deal.
Okay, thank you. Carol, let's continue and then I'll address the other questions as we go.
Okay, all right. So I just want to get clear. At what stage in production do you look for a streamer or a cable company to purchase your film?
Well, if you're saying purchase your film, you're making the assumption that you've already shot your film, or basically you've shot it and it's like in post-production or something like that. I mean, if that's the case, that you've shot the film and you're already through post-production or you're finishing post-production, as a whole, you know, it's an acquired project, basically, and it's not really, it's an acquisition. It's not like they're developing it like, you know, from scratch in-house, which is what we've been talking about previously. So, and, you know, obviously if it's finished, it's a whole different story. And that's even more, you know, you might want a sales agent. Problem with a lot of the major sales agents, they've all become kind of festival junkies, major festival junkies in a way, where it's like, you know, call us when you get into Sundance or Toronto or Tribeca or South by Southwest, and then, you know, we'll come aboard as your producer's rep or sale representative, which, you know, I mean, obviously the best place to make, you know, to, you know, get that stamp of approval is a festival has picked it up. You know, if that's not the case, you know, sometimes, you know, again, you can try to find a sales agent that'll take it on, even though it's not it's not attached to or going to a festival, basically. That's, again, if you have an agent, a lot of the agencies, act as producers, reps as well. Managers, a little less so. They're more talent managers than anything else in order to do it. Again, it reminds me a lot of the music industry. There used to be something called A&R, artists and repertoire, where it's like finding new acts. And basically what happened at the end of the day was, it's like you act as your own A&R person. You act as your own agent. You get it into the festivals. You build up the buzz. And then basically we find you on our radar, and then we see if you're interested. So that's why the festival circuit has become, the festival path has always been kind of a tried and true one in terms of, tied into acquisitions, either with or without a producer's rep or a sales agent.
Right. So then it really behooves people to either go to these top festivals or try to stream the films so they get an idea of the quality of work that it takes to get into Sundance, Tribeca, etc. Right?
Yeah, I mean, again, basically, a lot of times, take a look at the festival, at the acquisitions of festivals. A lot of times you can find through the trades and other media, who is actually the sales agent for it. And you kind of get an insight into who has the ear at the festivals or in general. So it's basically doing your due diligence and research, because you'll see a lot of sales agencies. You'll see for documentary Submarine and Cinetic and and so forth. And you'll see, I mean, again, the names keep cropping up, especially those that make the deals at the festivals. And sometimes you get to find out, because usually it winds up in the press release who's negotiated the deal.
Right. So your goal is to make a deal and let them take you to Sundance or Tribeca by finding them through those.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'll give you. Well, again, it's kind of. I wish I could say it's a level playing field, because it's not, because a lot of the films that are in Sundance basically have in the labs, or they're part of the financing forum for them called Catalyst. Basically, which is really like lab films that meet rich people, as one person called it. And I have my clients go through the Catalyst process. I don't want to really depress anyone saying like, it's only like 2 or 3% of the films that are submitted to the Sundance actually, get in, and then how much get, like 0.5 get distribution. I mean, you can look at you can hear the numbers and get sad for yourself, pretty much. But again, it isn't Sundance or bust, or Toronto or bust. I mean, again, you have you do that, you Tribeca, you have the South by Southwest, and you got a lot of solid regional film festivals that, basically people do attend because, the acquisition people, because that's how they earn a living. Even though someone did a survey and actually broke down past like the Sundances, that most acquisition companies only acquired like one film every like 2 or 3 years, basically. So it's always going to be rough sledding, but again, it's a path to pursue. And again, there are a lot of very solid film festivals that aren't, on that A or A- or B+ list.
Okay. Well, let's go back to documentaries now, because I've watched documentaries that have some people attached, or the producer or the director particularly, who are known, and they get the film like halfway made and are far enough along that they raise their money through nonprofits, and they get far enough along to take it into a Netflix or Hulu, and then they'll come on and fund it. But that takes really top drawer people. So would you say to other documentary filmmakers that is a good plan, to get enough shot that maybe you're 50% completed, but you have some string outs or some long shots that you can show the essence of the film along with the great trailer and the pitch deck?
Well, I mean, again, it's a little bit of the court of last resort in a strange way in terms of using, these services as a means of funding, because I said it kind of weakens your negotiating position, because they know, you got to have a film, basically. And, again, if you can find other means, whether it's crowdfunding or grants or donations or investors, to get that film completed, or as completed as possible, you're in an entirely different position in order to do that. Because, and again, a lot of times these services are going to basically say, well, we like it, but show it to us when it's finished. It's like they're putting the onus back on you to finish the film so they can make an acquisition decision.
Right. Okay. So really, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, at what stage can you start sales discussion on your feature film? And really, that's at the very end. You have to raise the money, make the film, and then go for distribution.
Yeah, because you have to take, I mean, just to go back to the embryonic stage that we referred to, again, take a look at a lot of the streamers in the documentary world. The ones that they tend to attract are ones that are like being produced by producers and directors with track records. The Rory Kennedys, the Liz Garbuses, the Alex Gibneys of the world, basically, who have a track record if they don't have deals already, with these services. Because again, it gives you a certain, good housekeeping, seal of approval. And then it's, or Imagine or anything like that. And then looking at the subject matters, again, the streamers, they tend to like, pop culture topics, music documentaries, celebrities who are, basically, celebrities, themselves. And a lot of times, a lot of the celebrities are, or not just celebrities as subjects, but sometimes celebrities as executive producers to the project as well. So, that's another factor. Again, a solid like historical project may not necessarily be good for the major streamers, unless it's like a topic, like a hot topic, basically. And what is really a hot topic? I mean, I have a client that is doing a project about, about abortion. And basically, it was very, very difficult. And of course, the timing now with the Supreme Court has made it, a little bit more desirable. Unfortunate circumstances to lead to that conclusion from a marketing point of view. But now, basically, there's more interest because Roe versus Wade may, be heading to the chopping block, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks. That's good information. Well, Naheed, do you have any other questions in the chat bar?
Yes, lots of questions. I hope we can get to all of them. In case we don't, I will put the contact information for Robert and Carol Dean. You can email us. But let's go to Javier's question. Very interesting question. If I release my documentary first from my own website, will that prevent me from wanting to distribute it later to a streaming platform?
We're now getting into the issue of what's called windows, the various windows that you go through. And again, when it comes to documentaries, the idea is to make it as exclusive as possible for people to see, to a certain extent, documentaries. The idea is, basically, if you put it on like YouTube or you put it on your website and anyone, their kid brother can watch it for free, basically there's no, motivation for other people to basically license the rights to your documentary if people have seen it already. So it's almost like you have to figure out the windows where one, you do, I mean, you can do festival screenings because those are not technically public. I mean, they're public, but they're considered private to a certain extent. But, you can basically do special events and things like that, basically. And this is where, I'll be very upfront. There's a service called Show and Tell, basically, which Carol knows, basically has spoken with, the President Keith, who basically, they do a lot of, online screening services. You can do online screenings, you can do, for events, you can do in-person events, things like that, educational, as well, and, dealing with the educational market, for documentaries that lends itself to education. Not all documentaries lend themselves as comfortably. That you should do. And then basically, transaction video on demand, there's not really a lot, for documentaries that deal with that. But whatever services you can find, the Roku and that actually are TVOD, transactional video on demand, are fine. That's fine. And then you do subscription, basically, and it's not just Netflix or Hulu, all that. It could be Tuvio, whatever. You can, basically you do that, again, bearing in mind, once you get that licensing fee for subscription, you're kind of at the end, you're kind of getting towards the end of the line. And of course, there's free television and things. And then of course there's advertising supported as well, in order to do that. But get your transactional, rights and your deals, moving and finished, and then you can finish up with the subscription advertising free. That is advertising free for all intents and purposes. That's the kind of the end of the line. And of course, the educational, you try to thread through there. And of course, whatever case, as I said, for documentaries, for DVDs, there's still some, even though the educational services are really doing a lot of institutional online, licenses as well. So that's, and again, when you deal with the streaming services, it's like, you go to, say, Netflix, and what rights do they want? They want everything that isn't nailed down, basically, and, in perpetuity, throughout the world, throughout the universe, etc. And, in order to do that, again, it used to be, you'd license it, to these service, these major streamers, and it was like 2-3 years and things like that. But now, they treat it almost like it's an acquisition. It's almost like they're buying the rights to your film. I had that with one of the last Netflix acquisitions. For a documentary. I haven't seen them do a lot of them now. It's one of the last, and we just basically picked it up. They called it a Netflix original, but it was really an acquisition. And what it was is really for the cost of the film plus a certain premium. And that worked because it was a not-for-profit that produced the film. Problem is, when you deal with the streamers and they make a deal, again, where do investors fit in? They don't fit very well for television and streamers. It's very difficult to get really the investor in the equation for film projects unless they've already been produced already. But even then, it limits their back end, basically, if it's a very high acquisition fee.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. There's another question, then we'll go back to you, Carol. And this is coming from Fernandez. If you are approaching a major production company to come in as a partner, how do you best protect yourself going in the initial meetings? Is it appropriate to have an NDA? What else do you recommend, especially when they are competing films?
Well, when it comes to nonfiction films, the problem is a lot of nonfiction films are based on, they're based on they're based on issues and subject matter, and issues and subject matter are like ideas. The ideas are not protectable. Concepts, unless they're really well developed. I mean, it's very hard, to do that. That's why you can have a lot of different, projects that have the same subject matter to them. I mean, at the end of the day, what's really you're bringing to the table is access to subjects, access to subject matter. The fact that you try and make a deal that they basically are dealing with you, as opposed to somebody else. That's what kind of makes your project, special outside of basically how well it's produced or directed, et cetera. But, and again, certain companies will not even sign an NDA. It's like, you don't trust us, forget it. They may make you sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. Yeah, you can try it, but the larger companies, they're gonna look at you like, what are you, paranoid? Even though, even paranoia sometimes means perfect awareness.
Okay. There's a very good question, Carol, before I go to you, from Tyler. It's a long question, but I think, Robert, this is a very interesting question. We will need your help for the answer. So Tyler is asking, we have an award-winning documentary, feature film, that has finished its festival rounds. We have an opportunity to submit it to a solid distribution company and go through film battles. My worry is that the company's paperwork form inquiries about the film having E&O insurance. We haven't got E&O. It's hefty amount. What if they don't pick it up and we pay $3,000 or $4,000 to get E&O? How do we deal with this? Should we ask them somehow if they can look at the work prior to our investment, since it was completed and in festivals from 2019 to 2021? Or do we still require E&O?
Well, I mean, a lot of distributors and sales agents, they're going to say, we'll go forward, but the problem is, by the time you sign this agreement, you better have E&O insurance, basically, because, we weren't involved in making the film. We don't know you got all your licenses and releases and all that. I mean, you'll show us your paperwork, but, again, a lot of our licensees, the people entities we do deals with, are basically wanting to have that assurance, especially if we're making deals with networks and streamers and others, and television, services, et cetera. So you can kind of push the ball down the road, but when it comes time to sign, the deal, you have to have all, your rights, buttoned up by the time you sign it, sewn up, so to speak, and you have to be able to get that E&O. That's a delivery element. You can't deliver, basically you sign the agreement, they're not taking your film. And yes, there's a cost to E&O, like there's a cost to everything. It's the cost of doing business. And if that company insists on it, you got no choice but to get the E&O if you want the deal.
Do any of the distributors pay the E&O for the film?
Fewer and fewer. And because basically they think that's the producer's obligation. I mean, if they're giving you an advance or a minimum guarantee or something like that, what will happen is you get the E&O, they'll, the cost of the E&O will be taken out of the advance of the minimum guarantee, basically. I mean, they're not, I mean, they're kind of loaning you the money, or lending you the money, I should say, in order to basically secure, pay the policy to secure the errors and omission insurance. Otherwise, it's like the same way you raised your money in order to get your film made, you got to raise the money to get the E&O.
Yeah,
Right.
Thank you. Carol, you can take over.
Okay, well, one of my questions is what rights do streamers want when they purchase documentaries and features? And you've said they want everything in perpetuity. Well,
let me just say that I have a client, for one project where the service is actually is not taking worldwide. They're taking North American rights. But they're
Yeah.
only putting up part of the money. That means
Oh.
my client has to go raise the rest of it. So, I mean, this is more of an exception than the rule. As a general rule, they want to just fund the whole thing, basically, and own the whole thing.
Right. Well, what if, Robert, you go into the negotiation saying, I want to keep the educational rights and the rights to do virtual screenings to my community, whatever that is, my market. Do you think that will hurt your chance of getting the distribution?
It can. I mean, again, if it's going to be for a significant figure, it's an all rights deal. I mean, I had that in the case of Netflix for a film where basically we wanted to carve out the educational, and they were saying that, we technically don't want to carve it out, but if you want to do educational screenings, we'll let you do it. The problem is you're taking revenue out of their hands. Again, if this is like for all rights, it's a harder argument to make. If basically this is not for all rights, basically then you can make a more colorable argument for carving out educational and on screen. It's not really, streamers are not the best places. I mean, again, you can make the argument that they're not the best people to handle educational rights, and again, if they're not offering you top dollar in terms of a licensing fee, you might be able to carve it out because they don't normally handle educational. But if they're paying a significant amount for all rights, that will make the argument even more difficult to make.
Okay. Well, what genre of films are selling well right now in features?
Well, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, in terms of narrative features, I mean, if you have mysteries and suspense, I mean, those type of things, they work well. Again, the general rule is who's in the cast. That's usually the number one thing, because if you want to have a drama with normally dramas are hard to sell sometimes overseas. They're very cast dependent, that type of thing. If you have the cast, then a drama is possible. If you don't have the cast, the drama is a tough genre to try to sell, just without that necessary cast. Comedy, again, here in North America is fine. It may not travel necessarily, but if you look, like science fiction, obviously there's a universality. Action adventure, obviously there's a universality to it as well, especially if there is, a noted cast. Basically family films, if they're like handled with the right company, basically, and they can make, that type of thing. Those are some of the genres. As I said, a lot of time, it's genre plus, again, something that's, the question is it's how well does it travel? In terms of if it's very dialogue driven. But again, if you have a significant enough, a marketable cast, you can forgive a certain amount of sins, so to speak.
Right. Well, what with documentaries? What's selling well? Biopics, social issues, historical? What's going on?
Well, as I said, on the streamer side and the HBO side, it's the social issues, the ones that people relate to. And again, I've always had this theory about documentaries that kind of mimic the tropes of narrative films tend to do well, such as Brothers Keeper years ago, which was like kind of a social comedy. Roger and Me, which was almost like a Frank Capra movie. The Thin Blue Line, which was really basically which was really a mystery story and a little bit of a crime drama in terms of exonerating somebody. I mean, the documentaries that kind of mimic to some way the narrative tropes, but they're the true stories. Those are the ones that tend to really, because you look, true crime, it is such a hot genre, whether it's, podcasts or, or film or television.
That's great. Well, okay, Naheed, any more questions? Because we're almost finished with time.
Yes, yes. There are a few questions, and mostly they're related to finding information. One is from Nilu, and she's asking, first of all, two questions. One is related to the first slide, working with a sales agent for the streamers. How does one find a sales agent? And then is it better to find a distributor before submitting to film festivals? And how do they find the sales agent? Is there a website they can go to?
Well, again, you can, yes, you can Google, the list of sales agents and distributors, and that's possible. I mean, you also have the American Film Market Association, where you have a huge list of sales agents, in terms of distributors. You can look at, like the Gotham, which is the Independent Feature Project, the International Documentary Association. They might, in terms of lists and all that. A lot, yeah, and a lot of it is homework, basically, and you just kind of Google it away, and also speak to people. Also, look at the projects that have secured distribution. Who basically is distributing them. Who's acting as the sales agent. Read the credits. That's
Okay.
that's kind of they'll help you kind of get an insight to who does what. Which types of projects. So it's,
Okay.
I know it's research, it's kind of being a sleuth of sorts.
Okay. And this other one is similar. Tyler was asking for a suggestion for a decent lawyer and insurance company for E&O. We have the release and music agreements. What's the best way to find a decent lawyer?
Well, I mean, basically, I do a lot of that work myself, and that's my little plug. So I'll get that over with. But again, as a general rule, take a look at the films. Also, look in the credits. Who does the legal services? As well. And then that's another insight. Also, talking to other filmmakers. This is a community that is driven somewhat by word of mouth. Basically. And again, not all attorneys are equal. I mean, there is a core level of knowledge, but there's time, there's, compensation, there's other factors. So, it's like, being the discerning shopper to a degree.
Okay. And then this one is from Wendy. It has a follow-up question too. Let me read it to you. What do you think about a documentarian inserting him or herself into the doc? I see this as a trend. I personally don't like it. And then she says, I don't mean like Roger Moore, as he is actually asking questions on camera. I mean like irrelevant comments being made about the camera angles or audio questions.
Well, in terms of Michael Moore and Roger and me and all that, yeah, I mean, basically he inserted himself into the process. Again, documentary, there are a lot of different documentary genres, for lack of a better term. You have those that basically verite, it's real life, it's being recorded, you're a fly on the wall. And then there's basically where you kind of, you insert yourself and you become a character. Or you're doing a very personal documentary, about yourself or a relative or a friend, and you can't help but insert yourself to some degree. So it depends on the type of project. And again, if the project kind of hits the right emotional heartstrings, then that can work. If it doesn't, again, it may be considered too narrow and too particular, unless that personal documentary has a universality to it. And you never really know that until you've done the project. Okay.
And just a quick reminder to everyone, we will be sending a recording of our event today to everyone that registered. Here's another question that's coming up. Very interesting on music licensing. Is there a central source to begin with music licensing?
Well, again, it depends on the music that you want. I mean, if you want like very popular music, then obviously you have to go and get the rights. And again, there are really two licenses in music ordinarily. There's the rights to the song, the composition, and that's called the synchronization license. You're syncing the music to the composition to the picture, and that is held by the music publishing company or companies as a general rule, and you need to get all their permissions basically for it to work, unless somebody has the right to negotiate on behalf of other music publishers. Basically, a lot of music publishers, they represent writers, etc. And then basically you have the right to the recording, which is the master recording, which is the master recording license, and usually that's the record company that has it. And occasionally it's the same thing, but mostly the popular music, especially, it's different companies that hold that. And usually, if you can, get a music supervisor to deal with this, because they have very good relationships with music publishing companies and record companies as well, or if somebody who's done it before. I mean, I usually don't do that type of I'm not a music supervisor to find songs and things like that. I'll provide licenses for them and negotiate them and review them, but basically that's generally what I do. A lot of times use original music when you can. Make a deal, obviously, license the rights to use it in a documentary or a motion picture for a certain amount of time for a licensing fee, as opposed to having to pay. It could be a work for hire, but then you have to pay for the rights to the music from the composer. Sometimes you can do you can get the rights to the composition and then basically not use the recording, do a cover version. I mean, a lot of different strategies. It's tricky music.
Okay. And then one question is, where can one find the best institutional license? This comes from Natalie.
Usually the company, educational distributors, because they deal with the institutions. There's a company called Good Docs, basically. I'm just using that as an example. But whoever handles those educational institutional licenses, those are the ones, basically the best people. A lot of times they specialize it, like Rocco Film, they do a lot of educational, things like that. And again, you take a look at the educational documentaries, who's distributing them. That's your guide to where you should go. Okay.
All right. Due to the time, I'll read out the last question and then we'll go back to you, Carol. Mary Davis has a very good question too. How does putting films on a library, school organization circuit affect the market potential on a streamer's cable station?
Well, again, the streamers, they like to have exclusivity, if they can, basically. So, you can see if you can basically exist in a world where you have a streamer, handling the commercial aspects to it, the general public, and then the educational ones. Again, it's difficult because, to make educational deals if it's already appearing on the streamer. I mean, the idea might be you want to handle your educational deals and then make your deal with the streamer, because once it's out there, the value of it in the educational market will go down because you can see it on the streamer.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
The other thing I'm saying, try to do your in-person virtual screenings, your educational. Try to take care of them as early as possible before you start taking it to the general public, and where it's being publicly disseminated.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robert, for answering our questions. I've also, for the audience, I have the information and contact for Robert on our slide presentation. We will be sending a recording of this event as well as the presentation for everyone that registered. Thank you again for joining, and I will pass it back to Carol for the closing.
Okay, thank you, Naheed. Thank you, Robert. What great information. You, every time you answer a question, it creates more questions. There's so much for independent filmmakers to do. It's amazing. A Harvard study said that independent filmmakers are entrepreneurs, and you all are. And we're so proud of you and the work that you do. And we want you to know how much we appreciate independent filmmaking. And lately I've noticed that Scorsese and other filmmakers are talking about the stream of content being delivered rather than what we really love, your independent created films. So just know that we really appreciate your art films. They're films we always remember long times in the future. We'll remember your films, and the films you make always push the boundaries, and they bring us wonderful, heartfelt stories. So thank you for that. We thank you for the documentaries and the features, because they're always empowering, and that's exactly what we need. I know it can be hard sometimes, and you seem like you're all alone, but you're not. As Lily Tomlin says, we're all in this boat alone together. So just know how much we need your films, and please keep the faith in yourself and the faith in your films. And we'll see you again in another month with another interesting consultation or interview with someone we find that you will enjoy. Thank you, Helen, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Natalie. Good to have you here. And Elizabeth, Crystal, it's just such a delight to see all of you together and all of us learning together. Thanks a lot.